Welcome to Pilates is the Answer podcast, where you can discover the power of Pilates and how it can improve every aspect of your life. We are your hosts, Stacey Jernigan
and Pearl Dahmen, and we look forward to introducing and sharing all of the questions about which Pilates is the answer.
Welcome back, Pilates is the Answer podcast family. So I'm excited today to bring back on Julie Turner. If you followed us during episode 5, we had Julie on then, and we talked a lot about Julie's journey with Pilates and just movement in general, her dance background and dance career. And I invite you to go back and listen to that if you haven't yet, or if you want to revisit it. It was a really great episode. And so today we're having Julie back on. We're going to be talking more in depth about the relationship between movement and Pilates, different types of movement in relationship to the central nervous system regulation. So Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back on. I'm really delighted to be back and be a part of this podcast. Essentially, this is sort of my passion in my work, and it's all about how our bodies respond and react to everything that we're thinking mentally, that we're feeling emotionally, and our environment, the things that we've been through externally and also internally. So, there's a large trend now. Everybody's becoming more holistic in the way they look at the body. Nobody's really looking at it in separate parts anymore. But you have to remember that this is pretty new in the grand scheme of things. Largely before people, you heard it all the time. There's the brain and then there's the body, the brain and then the heart. People would always make this distinction. Now, I'm very happy to say that a lot of people, medical professionals, wellness professionals, movement people are on board now with looking at the body as one whole and seeing all of those individual parts as one whole and all the parts working together to create harmony within our body. But the way this works is through the nervous system, right? So we have all of these synapses in our brain, and they fire up and they're sending messages to the body through the nervous system, where all the nerves go through the spinal cord and then branch out into the body. And then the body does. And then it sends the message back to the brain. Hey, I felt. That felt good, that felt hot, that felt cold, that felt bad, that caused pain. All those messages are constantly going on throughout the day. And there's so many of them, and they're happening so rapidly that it's autonomic. We don't have to really put our focus on it. That said, whenever we experience whatever we experience, whether good or bad, it does get housed in our body through that delivery system in the nervous system. And that has more to do with our fight or flight response and how our body reacts and responds to potential threats. And so the brain has the protective mechanisms that causes us to either say, "Ooh, I gotta fight this, I gotta run away." Some people go into freeze. We've heard a lot more about those responses lately as well. And all of that is happening because of the nervous system. And the biggest nerve, and it's like become a buzzword in the past 5 years, the vagus nerve. So it's so funny because I started doing this work 15 years ago, and when I started doing it, I was like, nobody's going to believe me. Everybody's going to think I'm crazy and I'm out of my mind. And now everybody's talking about it in this way. And I'm so excited. And I bet you, I'd be willing to bet that everybody who's out there publicly talking about it was also doing it 15 years ago going, nobody's going to believe me. So I'm glad to see it out there. So no, I'm not the inventor of this, but it has been really integral to my work and I'm very passionate about it. So I love talking about it.
Okay, well, so I have so many questions, of course, and I'm sure you're going to get to some of this, but one of the things that I'm first thinking about as you're talking about it is, well, of course, I want to hear how you first got involved, because you mentioned a lot of times those things just happen automatically. And so I want to know a lot about, why some people are more aware of those kind of automatic responses within our bodies than others. Because I know, even when somebody's taking a Pilates class, for example, that sometimes they'll notice if a certain body part is taking over and sometimes they won't. And it's hard to know, is it because that isn't actually activating, or is it because they really don't have that connection? And sometimes it could be either one, so I'm just thinking in terms of like when people don't have as much awareness, do you think it's related to this? And then of course, like what can we do to improve that awareness and improve that connection, if that makes sense?
So let's break down kind of the basics of the science of it first. So first of all, brain science is always, it changes rapidly and it changes every day. So at the time of this recording even, it's probably changing as we speak. People find different answers and they find different things on a daily basis. But largely where we're at right now is that we know that there's pieces of the brain that are specifically designed for survival. It used to be called the reptilian brain because it's the first part of the brain that develops. It's the oldest part of our brain because it develops first. Because when you're a baby, you are in survival mode. Your only goal in life is to survive by any means possible. And that usually means by getting the love and the nurturing from your parent or guardian. Right. And then from there, as we age, it takes about roughly 25 years for our brains to fully develop. And as we age, we develop these different pieces. And then next is the limbic system, the emotional center that comes after that. And then finally, the frontal and the prefrontal cortex develop. They're the last pieces of development. The prefrontal cortex actually develops in the late teens and early 20s, which is kind of why teenagers, they do all sorts of stuff without realizing the consequences of their behavior, because they're in rebellion mode in terms of their adolescence and their growth. And two, because they haven't fully developed that piece of the brain that says, if you do this, this will happen. So they don't really connect those dots. This is why we all get in trouble when we're teenagers. And then when we're in our 30s, we look back on that and like, what was I thinking? You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of the basic essentials, and I am really being basic here. So if you're interested, like I've said before, probably on the last thing, I love talking about this and diving deep into this. So if you're ever interested in just really digging into the deep science of it, I'm always around. But I'm just trying to give the basics so that we can continue with the conversation. So essentially what happens is you have the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the biggest nerve responsible for our nervous system response and reaction in the body. And that means the fight, flight, or freeze response. It starts in the brain, because they do, and it goes through your spine, it travels through your diaphragm, and it goes into the abdomen, and then it has all these branches that branch out into the abdomen. Basically touches every vital organ in our body and all the connective tissue surrounding those areas as well. In particular, the diaphragm and psoas muscles are greatly affected by the nervous system in the body. And I can go all day about that too. As you know, I have a whole psoas diaphragm connection workshop that I teach, and I could go on and on and on about it. But just for the purposes of this, it touches all those nerves and it causes the physiological response in our body. So you either have, when people have a fight, a flight response in their body, they have those hypervigilance inside the body. They have the anxiety, the cold sweats, the heart palpitations, the nervous tummy people talk about. All of those things are the fight or flight response within the body. That nervous feeling, butterflies in your stomach. All of those things are linked to this nervous system response in the body. But then the freeze state creates numbing. So I can, on this like grand scheme of things, all throughout your body, you have these separate responses that can happen. And if a person has suffered, for example, when you largely see people that have had an injury or illness, or they've had surgery in a particular area of the body, and then muscles surrounding that area have trouble firing, a lot of times that's because there becomes this freeze state, even in the part of the body, the tissues and the muscles that are surrounding that part. And then they have trouble reconnecting to it because there's some sort of disconnection between the brain and that part of the body. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, but then you, on the other side of things, when you're talking about when you have people that can feel it very readily, you also have some people, and a lot of people who have suffered, I had this for PTSD or anxiety, and any sort of anxiety attack, you develop a sort of hypervigilance inside the body. I mean, I literally had a time period of my life when I could feel, every little bubble floating around in there. I could feel everything in my body, and it's not great. You're like panicking all the time. You're like, I have this small, tiny experience in my chest. I must be dying. You know what I mean? And part of doing the work is realizing, oh, I'm in this hypervigilant state, and I need to, if I regulate my nervous system, like now it's not so much. And I still feel things a lot because I'm also sensitive, and and I'm observant, and I'm constantly thinking about the body. So it just kind of goes with the job. But I don't have that anxiety, hypervigilant state anymore because I've done all the work and I've embodied the healing work as well. So those are extreme examples. But as with anything, if you take those two extreme examples, the numbness and the hypervigilance, you could create this spectrum or this line where pretty much everybody falls in at some point. Some people might be more middle ground where, it's kind of barely an experience of hypervigilance, a kind of barely an experience of numbness, but you do kind of find that happening. And I just notice when people are struggling to fire a muscle, there's different schools of thought as well. Of course, one of them would be that muscle doesn't work as hard because the antagonistic muscle is taking over. So you also have to look at that. For example, if people can't fire their glutes, you got to look at their hip flexors. If their hip flexors are overworking, that could be why they're not firing their glutes. That said, part of the hip flexor is the psoas. The psoas is the biggest fight or flight muscle we have in our body. So probably the nervous system is still playing a role, right? So you have all those different pieces that you kind of have to look at as an instructor and see, which one is at play here. And then the way to, did you ask me also the way to work with it? Just going to give you. I'm just going to give you that. You ask for it or not.
No, I definitely want to know for sure.
Yeah.
I want to know, and you can answer that first. But I also want to know, how to bring it up in terms of when you're working with somebody, or if it's something that you bring up right away, and just recommendations on that too. Because I know, like you mentioned, that when you first started, studying the vagus nerve, and just in general, sometimes people are defensive or, just not open to believing that it could be something related to anything other than physical, that it's not just a physical response or lack of response, and that there might be something underlying that is related more to, it's still related to science, but related to more of the emotional or mental piece of it, if that makes sense. And so how do you, gently bring it up in a way that you can help people understand that they can have a little bit more of an active role in this whole process of, yes, the end goal might be to get the glutes to activate, for example, but there's a lot that can go into it, when you're trying to uncover that reason for why they're not activating.
Right. And it depends on the situation too, right? Like, let's say you're in a group class and you don't know any of these people. You're not going to dive into it, right? Like you might just, or if you're in a private session and you have a more intimate relationship with somebody and they're asking about it. A lot of people who come to me, they come to me with complex pain. And so they're actively asking to uncover these things, right? I think that is where your intuition as an instructor has to come into play, and your relationship with the client in front of you comes into play. I do think this is now, a widely talked about experience. So it's becoming more of the norm to sort of, dive into these things. But like you said, some people may not be into it. And you don't have to be, because that said, and this is the whole point for this is I don't go around, even when I go to the domestic violence shelter where I teach class, I'm not going there and talking to them every day about, I'm here to regulate your nervous system, right? I just show up and, Sometimes we dive into it just because they're, it's a whole, the whole idea is that I'm eventually giving them the tools they need to like do it all on their own. So sometimes we get there, but mostly I just show up and I'm like, okay, let's start. We stretch and we move our bodies, and the results just happen. So there's the pieces that I know that help people. For example, alignment, right? So the reason alignment is so important is because if you get your body, your spine, your skeleton, your muscles balanced, if you get yourself in a good physical alignment, your vagus nerve also gets in alignment. And that means that it can function better. And there's a lot of people right now that this is very important for me to say, because I think what we do when somebody first mentions, oh, the nervous system is active, people think, oh, you need to calm down, or I need to calm down, right? But that's not necessarily true. What you need is a functioning active nervous system. A functioning active nervous system gets stimulated when it's supposed to, and then relaxes when it's supposed to. So we have this for a reason. It's for survival. I always tell this story because it was recently this happened, and I was very excited about it because I felt my nervous system worked like perfectly. And I was very excited about it because and like I said, and if you haven't listened to, the past episode that I was on, I was in an abusive relationship and I had PTSD after, and when I was going through that process, I did have this, really dysregulated nervous system. I was all over the place, having anxiety attacks all the time. And there were moments where I could barely leave my house, and the hypervigilance in my body and just everything that I was feeling. I went through that for many, many years, and I worked through it. And I'm on the other side of it now. And one of the biggest things that helped me know that, and this happened this year, I was actually driving down to the shelter. I was on my way to the shelter, and somebody literally tried to come over on me into my lane, like I'm driving, like they were in their car. And I was kind of quick response, and I got out of the way. And then, I averted any form of accident, and I didn't even honk my horn because, there's no time. Like, you're like instinct survival, get out of the way, right? And right after that, my entire body flooded with that like heart palpitations, that nervous feeling, like I was sweating a little bit. But then I kept driving, and I was able to be like, no, but that, accident averted. It didn't happen. I'm okay. I'm totally safe. And about 2 seconds later, the response also went away in my body. And I felt very excited about that experience. One, because nothing happened and there was no harm done. And two, because I was very excited about the fact that my nervous system worked the way that it was supposed to. It's supposed to get stimulated and get active when you're in danger so that you can make a quick decision and get yourself out of danger. But then the parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to kick in and allow you to calm down afterward. Now, when you have a dysregulation for whatever reason, and quite frankly, we're kind of in this space where we're all dysregulated, in various ways, because we're in this age, in this time period. It's like we're in this time period where we're constantly being bombarded with information. And sometimes, I'm not saying that we shouldn't know things. Of course, we should know things, but information can be overwhelming if you get stuck watching a negative news cycle too much, or if you're just going through a really hard time in your life and things just keep going wrong one after the other in your life. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge traumatic event, although of course it could be, but it can be a lot of little things adding up that really cause you to become completely unregulated. And all that means is that you're not able to have the appropriate response and then have the appropriate come down or the parasympathetic response after that. And so part of the reason that we use movement, and this is what movement helps to regulate that response in the body. Alignment is number one, the biggest thing. Two, this is why I'm diving in now to why Pilates is so great for it, because everything is about the breath. using the breath and connecting the breath to all of your movement, number one, and alignment is another basic principle. But also about control is the wrong word because like I know that Pilates was called contrology, and and I know that Joseph, I know that was the word back then, and I'm not dissing it. Like it's great, like that. Those were the appropriate words, but right now in this conversation is not the best word because a lot of times when you're dealing with anxiety, it's the lack of control that you can't. Right. You know what I mean? Like anxiety has a lot to do with control. So I don't want to say that you're making an effort to find control because, like, I know for me, surrendering control was literally the only thing that helped me at times. But the not the control over your body, but the thoughtfulness over your body, the intentional movement, right? Being able for your brain to say, glutes engage, and then for your glutes to actually engage. And there's exercises that are kind of foolproof, right? That if you put people into a specific position and you say, lift your leg to the back or bend your knee, their glutes are going to do the best they can. And then in that moment, if you say, actively think about engaging your glutes right here, or that gluteal fold, that's my little favorite piece, that connection between the hamstring and the glutes. Actively think about engaging it right here when you go into the bridge, for example. And then that starts to build the synapses in the brain. And over time, in repetition, if you do that over and over again, multiple times a week, eventually it becomes an automatic response in the body. And you build the connection, right? So you can do this with people and strictly leave it to speaking about movement. You can focus on alignment. You can focus on breath. You can focus on building those connections and creating balance and never mention the nervous system whatsoever. And you are still helping them regulate their nervous system, whether they know it or not.
It's an added bonus.
Exactly. Yeah. And then they're like, I'm so happy now. And you're like secretly like, yeah, I know why.
That is so encouraging. I love all of that. So, I mean, when you're thinking about how did you first get involved and knowing that this was something that was a thing, right? And it was an important part of healing.
Right. So I got in, well, first of all, I mentioned this before too. I was teaching those wedding dances, remember? And people used to tell me I should be a marriage counselor. And I was like, I don't understand. And I realized, I did realize there was a great power in movement because I was teaching communication with the physical body, and then they were translating that. And, I was looking very deep in my appreciation of the body, and that has a lot to do with dance and stuff like that. But simultaneously, I was dancing. I was a modern dancer in New York, and I was getting my Pilates certification. And when you go through the Pilates, and I was doing my mat certification at the time. And when you go through the Pilates mats, or any certification, you have to do all those observation hours, and you got to do all the practice classes, and you got to teach all the practice things and all that stuff. And I was also in rehearsals, and I was taking dance class to try to keep up with my dance technique. And I was doing all of those things all at the same time. And I also had debilitating panic attacks from the PTSD. And so, I had moments when I was lucky that I lived on the Upper East Side at the time. And a lot of my clients for the wedding dances lived there as well. So I got to do a lot of walking to those sessions, which was very handy because for me, I had a really hard time on the subway. And I remember admitting it because it's such a regular thing. When you live in New York, you go down to the subway. And to be honest, when I started teaching Pilates and I was teaching the wedding dances, I was on and off the train 8 or 9 times a day. And this was a personal hell for me because I would have panic attacks on the train, especially if it would get stopped in between the stations. And that's kind of where I pieced together that there was some element of control involved, or the lack of control that I felt. And when I pieced that together, I did start to go, okay, this has something to do with my past experience. Like I obviously felt like I had no control in that relationship. And now this fear of having no control, even though by this point I had left the situation, that fear, sorry, let me backtrack. So I got out of that situation because I went into survival mode. The flight response kicked in. I packed up all my stuff and I left. And then afterwards, that's when I physically started feeling everything, because that's when it all settled into my body. And I felt the physiological response of my nervous system. And so that's where the panic attacks came from in the first place. So I did start piecing it together, but then I noticed once I left a dance class, or when I left Pilates, or when I was teaching, when I was observing even, I didn't have the panic attacks. They started to subside, especially after movement. And so I started thinking about why. Why does this make a difference? And I sort of started to understand the psoas muscle during that time, because I realized that for my own personal body type, I have a really curvy lumbar spine, I got a big butt, and I'm folded. I basically like also could like completely folded over my hips. I have very tight hip flexors. And so I thought, okay, if I'm standing on the train and I haven't been connected and I'm just standing there, my hip flexors are gripping and grabbing on. And so I'm having that flush of that anxiety rush through my body. So that was the physical part of it. And then when I go to take ballet, you know what I mean? That gets you up onto your legs and get you out of your hip flexors. Taking Pilates, balancing my body out, finding that good alignment, modern dance, all the things that I was doing was helping me physically get in better alignment. And so then I would be standing there able to breathe better, not gripping in my hips, and that response wouldn't happen as readily. But I also just noticed, there's so many other benefits to movement. So I just started researching it. And then I found out that the psoas is your fight or flight muscle. And then as I was looking at anatomy books, I realized there's these the ligaments that come down from the diaphragm that cross over the upper psoas. And I said, oh, there's a huge connection there. Like they play on each other. And so I just started putting it all together, going from there. And it took a couple of years to even just dive into all of that. And that said, that wasn't the end of my anxiety journey. That was just the beginning of starting to figure it all out. But it was largely movement that helped me start to piece things together and start that healing process.
It's so cool that you figured that out on your own. I'm so impressed.
So I know, right? Like, actually, like, I was like really proud of myself, because I also the subway's a really interesting place for deep thought. I also really got into the Einstein's theory of relativity at the time, and I was like, this makes total sense to me. But it was the introspection. Like it was the deep. I was going in deep, and because I mean, first and foremost, that said, I don't know, I started this process. I'm trying to think of what year all this was. I would say that I at least had 2 years of it full force before I really started deep diving into the work. So there was for those 2 years I was convinced that I had underlying heart disease. You know what I mean? And I was in my mid-20s, physically active, a dancer, you know what I mean? Like doctors were like, you're the fit of health. And I would be like, but how do you know? I was like, I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. I was like, but you gotta look at everything. You gotta figure all this stuff out. You don't know.
There must be something wrong. I know for people that I know that have had panic attacks that I've worked with, or even family members, and I don't know that I don't think I've ever had one that I can recall, but I know that a lot of times people say that they feel like they are having a heart attack, or feel like it's a heart event. And the only thing that I can relate to in that way, I mean, I do struggle with stressors and anxieties and worry and things like that, but the most severe that I experienced was after my brother died. And so my grief was so intense, which I'm sure somehow plays along with this. And I wasn't sleeping well, so that was part of it too. And I feel like I was just constant, state of stress and anxiety. I had become a single mom not too long before that. So it was all kind of, I think, related. And I remember going to the doctor, and thinking that I had a brain tumor or something, like something severe, because I couldn't sleep. And I was, so kind of like dizzy sometimes and would just feel like disoriented or whatever. And so anyway, I don't know how much of that is related, but what what it does make me think about is that how we do have so much, again, control. I hate to use that word, but control, or we do have the answers a lot of times within ourselves, and we don't often realize it. So whether it's related to a physical pain, or whether it's related to an emotional pain or trauma or anxiety or worry or lack of sleep or grief or whatever it is, and I feel like so many times we look elsewhere for the answer, like, help me fix this, or what can you prescribe, or what can I do, or where can I go, or who can help. Which of course we do need resources, and we do need to be able to find ways to improve our coping skills and improve our alignment and improve our breathing and our mindfulness and all of that. But it's just so cool that we have so much power within ourselves to actually be able to do that. I mean, of course, you need to learn techniques, and you need to learn, ways to do it, a consistency, and sometimes have support with that with accountability and all that kind of stuff. But just the fact that we do have so much within us that can learn to be able to regulate these things, it's just really cool to me and to think about. And it's really impressive that you were able to find this, on your own. I think that's so cool.
Oh, well, thank you. But and as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about one of the classic representations of anxiety is thinking that you're sick and you don't know. Invisible illness, right? Like it's a very classic representation or manifestation of anxiety, is thinking that you have cancer, because it's like this big scary thing that you can't see. You know what I mean? Yeah. You don't have the flu. You know that because you're not sick right in that moment, right? Yeah, but there's this always, and I had some of those thoughts as well, big scary thoughts of what could I possibly have. So that it was 100% what your experience was during the time. Like it was, I totally get it. And I agree with you. I think it's fascinating that we do have these tools. And like you said, we need people, we need somebody to help us discover the tools often. I did end up, of course I did therapy much later. And then I also did, I did like a book about the mindful way through anxiety, I think was the title of it. And I did that later on once I started piecing all these things together. But, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that And you can go to talk therapy, you can listen to people, you could read self-help books, you could do everything. And until you embody something, you're just scratching the surface of anything, right? And I always tell people when I'm trying to give somebody advice, if you're trying to change your mindset on something, for example, like I said, write it on a Post-it. If you're trying to say, we'll just take something simple like I'm safe, like that word, those words, I'm safe, write that on a Post-it and put it somewhere where you're going to look at it multiple times a day and read it to yourself. I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. And at first you start to notice the response. Sometimes you're like, am I though? And that's like what happens at first, right? And then you start to go, and then your body goes, yeah, I am though. I know that I am. I've made myself that. I've made myself safe. And then it starts to sink in deeper and deeper and deeper. And the further you do it, and then I say, as soon as you feel that in your body, and you'll know it because it's like a knowing. There's this thing that happens that's like this knowing in your body where you have embodied this understanding, and then you get rid of the Post-it because you don't need it anymore. But part of the embodiment process is through movement, which is where all of this crosses in with each other. And so I say, yes, I am very excited that I came up with it, but I know that it was movement that pushed me there, and what that shows me is that we all have that capability to come up with this, right? It's just that my experience at the time, and I think probably if I wasn't learning to teach at the same time, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was that I was doing and learning how to teach at the same time. So then it was not that I was just feeling it. I was also expressing it to other people. And I just had the feedback. And also, you know, when you're having debilitating panic attacks, you're like, you are literally, that's all you think about.
Right.
You're doing everything. It's all you think about. How can I not panic? And how, you know, like, you know, if I have to get on a plane and go visit my family, like how many panic attacks is that going to be? And like, you know what I mean? Like, do I want to go out with my friends, get on the train, or, you know, do I want to walk? Let's make this a walkable thing. So I know that I won't panic, you know?
Yeah. See, and then it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy in a
Uh-huh.
way, because
Uh-huh.
you're playing into it. And so then, yeah, so it goes back to that whole like self-talk. And
Mm-hmm.
so just, yeah, I think it's really a lot. I want to definitely dive in deeper for sure. But just for today's purposes, for our listeners, do you have just a short flow of exercises that you can take us through, that we can, you know, just start with something simple? So for people who are just at home and, you know, listening to this and maybe just want somewhere to start and somewhere to begin with in terms of alignment, breath, movement, all of those things pieced together, that we can start, you know, thinking of ways to bring our bodies back into better alignment, especially as it relates to all those places you talked about that the vagus nerve attaches to.
Mm. Yes. So a couple of different things. So there's definitely a series of Pilates exercises, or there's lots of Pilates exercises that I think are really great. One, neutral spine abdominals. And this is for anybody who kind of knows a little bit about the Pilates repertoire, teachers, people that have been taking for a long time. So you kind of know these exercises. So, you know, any neutral spine abdominals, toe taps, straight leg lowering, both single leg, double leg, marching, all that good stuff, frogs, are really great because you connect the breathing of the diaphragm into the connection of the core, and you start to warm your body up and you piece all of that together. Bridging is also really good because it stretches, it's an active stretch of the hip flexor, which can also always get overactive in states of anxiety. And it also engages your hamstrings and helps you find that hamstring glute connection. That's so great. And then any sort of like kneeling abdominals, movements from plank, one leg balances, lunges, stuff like that, where you're trying to find alignment and balance within the body, is always really handy. So, you know, a lot of times when people are at home and they're doing stuff, you know, you start with a little bit of abdominal work, get connected to your breath. And then from there, it's just finding movement that makes you feel like you're connecting and aligning your body. And that also feels good and supportive. And it doesn't have to be gentle. So I want to be very clear, because we don't need to just relax. I mean, anxiety is the way that I experience things, but remember what I said is that some people go into a freeze state, so they need stimulation. So for somebody who, if you find yourself in an anxious state, you're going to really focus more on connecting to your breath, connecting to your deep abdominals, maybe moving a bit slower. If you find yourself in that freeze state, you might want stimulation. You might want to do something that is a little bit of a quicker paced exercise routine. Going for a walk is an excellent idea. Go for a walk. Think about your diaphragm, if you know the anatomy of it. If you think about the way the rib cage opens and expands on the inhales, and try to breathe all the way into your rib cage and connect to your core deeply just as you're walking around, especially outside on a nice day. You get nature, you get the wind, the sunshine perhaps. All of that stuff is very great for regulation. But I do even have a little movement improvisation that people can do. You know, have you ever done a body scan meditation?
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like a body scan meditation, except for it's all about movement. So a body scan meditation is basically where you lie down, you close your eyes, and then you try to take deep breaths and soften your body. And then you think about different body parts and you notice if there's tension, and you try to use the breath to release that tension. Or sometimes you squeeze the fingers and then release them. That's a body scan meditation. You're just going from head to toe through the body, taking your time, noticing, observing, and then trying to find some relaxation within the body. You can, in a movement improvisation, you kind of want to start with that in mind. You would start maybe finding just a comfortable place, sitting or lying down, close your eyes, focus on your breath, and just allow that breath to get slower more rhythmical and deep in the body so that you're really going all the way into your abdominals every time you take an inhale, which is sort of different than when we're doing abdominal work, but for this purpose, it's fine. And then you want to scan your body for tightness or painful feelings. So sort of doing a quicker body scan. And then you sort of want to notice what movement feels intuitive to you. So everybody will have movement that feels intuitive for them. And first of all, I just want to preface this by saying I get it. People don't like improvisation, but you don't have to do this in front of other people. You could do this in your room by yourself with all the lights off so no one will ever know, so don't worry and don't be embarrassed by it. But I get not wanting to go into a group and do improvisation. People are very uncomfortable with that. So be by yourself and enjoy this, but just doing the body scan, noticing what feels tight or tense. You can even place a hand. For example, if you're feeling anxiety, you might really feel that in the top of your stomach, like up by your diaphragm where your stomach is. You could place your hand over your stomach and just offer yourself that comforting touch, and breathe and send breath into your hands and try to soften as you exhale. You can gently touch or brush or tap. Tapping is always a good way to bring a little bit of stimulation if you need stimulation, or it calms you down if you need calming. If your heart is pumping, you could put your hands over your heart, or you can gently tap or brush your heart. Take deep breaths, sigh. Sighing is a good way to release some stuff. And then from there, you do start slow. You can start slow, or you can move quickly. You just notice, what does my body feel like it wants to do? Do I feel like I want to jump up and down? Jump up and down. Maybe you want to fold, maybe you want to lift your hands up, maybe you just want to be still, maybe you want to twist your knees or roll around. You can try any of that. Stepping onto your feet, shifting back and forth, circling your arms or your legs, holding something, squeezing and releasing, all of those things. You can get grounded, get really low down onto the ground, or you can reach up high. And so you kind of want to go through motions where you're just feeling what your body wants to do. And then you can try to do the opposite of your intuition. Okay, if I feel like going low, I'm going to go high and stretch my arms out and see what that feels like. If I feel like moving quickly, I'm going to try to slow myself down, or vice versa. If I feel like I want to be really contracted and small, maybe I try to expand my body and get big. And then after a few minutes of that, you could just sort of come to a position where you've stopped, and then you just notice what came up for you, notice what you're feeling, and then you can journal about it, you can write about it. This is where I recommend, though, if you're dealing with something intense, if you're dealing with a trauma, I'm a huge recommender of, a professional therapist, finding somebody that can help you work through this stuff. Even if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know, that might trigger me, maybe talk to your therapist about doing it when they're on call, you know what I mean? Don't, so that you know that you're supported if you do get triggered by something, because sometimes movement can trigger feelings, right. So you want to make sure that you have all those systems in place in case that happens, so definitely if you're going through something really intense, or if you do have PTSD, might not do this on your own yet. You might have do this with a therapist. I always recommend therapists that do somatic experiencing, because that's a way of diving into the body and stuff like that. So that's a great resource, somebody that could help you through this and help you with it. But largely, if you're just, mostly you can do it on your own. It's safe. It's just gentle movement. And if you are, you can listen, and also you can say, oh, this sounds like something I might want to do, and think about it and put it away in the corner of your mind, and then come to it at a later date as well.
How often do you recommend doing it?
As often as you need it. Right?
Okay.
As you know, and this is, so I like when in a healing journey, when you're in the thick of it, you might need to do it like every day. But once you start feeling a little better, then you space it out. And I don't really do this per se so often anymore, but I do this, I have this on hand for if I get triggered, like if my nervous system just sort of erupts on me, and then I have this on hand because these are my tools. This is my tool belt. You know what I mean? But mostly I'm just going through my life, and I exercise and I move my body on a daily basis, and that usually covers it. And that's why it's like I'm such a big promoter of movement and exercise, because that usually does the trick. For most people, that does the trick, right? But if you find yourself, if you have anxiety and you're really just trying to regulate, you're trying to relax, movement is a way that you can do this. And so this is a good in the moment. Yeah. So this is a good tool. It's a great tool. And again, like huge disclaimer, like if you're, never do anything without the guidance and clearance of a professional. If you really need, if you're in a space, if you're really working through something right now, if you're hearing this and you're feeling like, oh, I've been going through this thing that's really traumatic for me and really intense, then yes, get your medical staff on board with every experience that you're having. I'm a big believer in that, because that's so handy, even to just be able to do it and then talk to somebody after. Like, let's say you have a regular therapist and your Tuesday appointment at 4 p.m. And so then maybe at 3 p.m. you do this for like 5 minutes and then you drive over and you talk about it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it. Yeah, but it can, but often when people are suffering from panic attacks and they know that's what it is, they're given breathing exercises. So this is very similar to that. Like, take your breathing exercises, add a little movement into it. It can help you regulate in the moment and can help you calm down, for lack of a better word. And then you can go and really discover everything after that,
Yeah. Perfect. I would love to, if you're open to it, I would love to have you maybe kind of teach me live, take me through a lesson, and then we could share that with our listeners. And that way they kind of can get a visual of what to do. And then also hearing your cues, and you have such a calm, encouraging voice that I think just your knowledge with the anatomy and all of that, I would love to hear you kind of carry us through a session if you're interested.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, we will get that scheduled then.
Perfect. Hey.
Thank you so much for always being so open. I think that, that's just one of the things that you have really been impressive for me, is how willing you are to be open and vulnerable and share your experiences, because, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to do that. But it makes such a big difference. It really does, because I know for me, I worry sometimes about if I share something that, it'll make somebody be worried about me, or it will, embarrass someone in my family, or I don't know, things like that. And so I've always been a very private person, and I'm working on that, but it's still kind of my go-to of being, like a little bit guarded and just, private. And so it's something that you're inspiring me to try to be a little bit more open, just because when we have an audience, so to speak, of course, with teaching and with the podcast and you with your YouTube videos and just everything, I think that it really will make such a big difference in a way that is much more significant than just the movement piece of it. Of course, that movement piece is so important, but just acknowledging the amount of healing that it can do with all of these other things that we're struggling with. I just think that that's what is really going to make an impact with people. And so I just appreciate that you're willing to do that.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, and I agree. And I feel, if I'm going to be totally honest, it's mostly because I'm like, okay, well, this is my calling and this is my passion, and my story goes hand in hand with it. You know what I mean? And so it makes it easier to be open in that sense. But I still do have, we had a board retreat for this shelter that I'm on the board for, and we were all going around introducing ourselves, and and I just said, I'm Julie, and I'm a survivor, and la la la, went on and on. And then of course later on that day I'm going like, oh God, like what do they think of me now, and are they feeling, you know what I mean, like, and that was like this year, so
I know, it's a journey. It's a constant journey for sure. And yes, and I'm sometimes I'm better at it than others. I think with my, especially because I'm teaching often in a large group class setting, which is not my comfort zone. I definitely do better in a small setting, just in general. And I, feel this like need to appear to have it all together, and to appear to, have everything planned and everything prepared, and not be rattled by anything. And it's an expectation that I have set for myself. It's not anything that necessarily has come up outside of a normal, like, be professional when you're teaching and leave,
Right.
personal issues at the door kind of thing, of course. But it's also just, this expectation that I have of myself of, yes, like, not being vulnerable, even if it's something that I have going on with my body, like I've hurt my shoulder recently, and I, haven't really told many people because I didn't want like to come across as, I'm supposed to have all the answers. And so I'm not supposed to be having something that I'm struggling with kind of thing, if that makes sense.
I get that. I
So
get
I have
that.
some work.
No, that's a very common mentality. And then what I think we're starting to realize now is that, you never know, when your story is going to really help somebody with theirs. And a lot of times, like, this as a mother, it's like when somebody comes to you for prenatal or postpartum and you've been through it. So it, for that in their mind, they're like, oh, well, of course she's going to know what to do because she's felt it. Not to say that there aren't plenty of experts that learn about prenatal without having gone through the experience. But, when a lot of times when a person comes to you, they're like, well, she's felt that feeling. Or when I have people have had, because I had a C-section. So when I have people that have had C-sections and they're trying to be like, well, I can't do the roll up because I had a C-section. I'm like, well, I had a C-section too. So yeah, you can, you know what I mean? And like, it helps them to know what's still possible. So, that's part of the learning experience is saying, well, if I get a shoulder injury, if something happens or I've got some tightness in my shoulder, well, I'm going to learn a lot about the shoulder joint that way. And then I'm going to have I'm bringing experience to the table. It's like when I go to the shelter, the moms, like for the longest time, I never shared my story with them because I thought, well, I'm supposed to be doing this thing and I'm showing up to help them. I don't want to make it about me. But when you're through it in a different way, you can share your experience without making it about you. I'm not, and then even recently, one of the newer moms shared that it was helpful for her to know. And so
hope, of course it gives maybe some sort of credibility and like a teaching aspect and a relatability aspect. But I think it gives hope that, when you can come so full circle to where you're able to be in the position that you're in after what you've been through. Yeah, I think it makes it important for them to feel hopeful and be able to connect with you in that way. So I think that makes perfect sense to be doing that.
Yeah.
So we will schedule the next session for you to or the next time for us to record where you can kind of lead us through a little movement session. And I would be honored to be able to do that with you.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Okay. Thanks so much, Julie. And remind our listeners where they can find you. So
yes, so you can find me on my website, www.julieturnermovement.com, Instagram @JulieTurnerMVMT. I've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com @JulieTurnerMovement, but all of that is also on my website. So if you just go to my website, all the information is there. You just click buttons and find me there. And I do free consultations. So if anybody's just wanting to do a little chat, hit me up on the website.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie.
And
I'll see you soon.
All right, sounds good. Bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for tuning in. For more information, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Pilates is the Answer and on the web at pilatesistheanswer.com.
Feel free to message us with questions for which you are searching the answer. We would love for you to follow our podcast, leave a kind review, and lots of stars.